Welcome to our Positive Links speaker series session, How to Change, presented by the Center for Positive Organizations at the University of Michigan, Stephen M. Ross School of Business. I am Julia Lee Cunningham, a faculty co-director at the Center for Positive Organizations and an associate professor of management and organizations. A few notes on the technology we are using today. During our event, attendees are view-only participants and cannot be seen or heard. We have turned off the chat and raise hand features. Instead, please use the Q&A feature to submit questions and upvote those questions that you would like to have answered by the end of the session, time permitting. And we have enabled live transcription services for our event, and this feature can be turned on or off using the Zoom settings at the bottom of your screen. Lastly, we're recording this event and we'll post the video on the CPO website as soon as we are able. The Center for Positive Organizations thanks Sanger Leadership Center, Tauber Institute for Global Operations, Zell & Drury Institute for Entrepreneurial Studies, and Diane and Paul Johns for their sponsorship support of the 2021-2022 Positive Links Speaker Series. We also thank our series promotional partners, Ann Arbor Spark, and the Managerial and Organizational Cognition Division of the Academy of Management. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I am delighted to introduce Dr. Katy Milkman, whose work I've been following for many, many years. Katy is an award-winning behavioral scientist and the James G. Dinan Professor at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. She hosts Charles Schwab's popular behavior economics podcast, which is called The Choiceology, which is something that I often listen to whenever I'm driving. And she's a co-founder and the co-director of the Behavior Change for Good initiative at Wharton. She has worked with and advised dozens of organizations on how to spur positive change, including Google, the US Department of Defense, the American Red Cross, 24-Hour Fitness, Walmart, Morningstar, et cetera, et cetera. Her research is regularly featured in major media outlets such as New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and NPR. In addition to being a star researcher and a star teacher, she is also a best-selling author of her book, How to Change, The Science of Getting from Where You Are to Where You Want to Be. Her PhD is in business and a joint degree in business and computer science from Harvard. And we happen to share an academic parent, which is Max Bazerman, who first opened my eyes to the world of behavior science as well. More importantly, Katy is one of those people who are not only fiercely intelligent, but also someone who cares deeply about making a positive impact in the world. And that spirit is all over her work. I got to know her most through the letters that she has written for her doctoral students on the market. She really pours her soul into nurturing and developing them. And you can easily tell what an amazing advisor she is to many of her former and current students. And of course, her research papers are so exciting to read, and her discoveries have such important implications for our understanding of human behavior and policy, which is something I aspire to achieve through my own research. So it is my great privilege to have you here today, Katy. Welcome to Michigan Ross.
Thank you so much. That was such a lovely introduction. And I should just say, I'm such an admirer of your work, and it's such a pleasure to be here. So thank you for the very kind words and for hosting me today. I'm delighted.
I am delighted as well. So exciting. So my first question is, can you walk through the thought process of writing this book? How did you make this decision of writing a book based on your research? And what was sort of the catalyst for that decision?
Yeah, no, I'd love to. And it's particularly fun to get to talk to you about that question as well as the audience, because I hope someday you will also write a book. And I suspect you'll have similar motives when you do. I think I always thought there would be a book in the work I was doing, only because my work has always been motivated by a desire to find practical solutions to real world problems. And a book is a great way to leave the ivory tower and try to communicate ideas once you feel like you've accumulated enough. But I think the real impetus for this came along around 2016. That was sort of the start of my book writing journey in a way, when, of all things, the MacArthur Foundation reached into their endowment and said they were going to do something different than they'd ever done before, which was to give out $100 million grant to a team that was making important progress on a pressing social problem. And the University of Pennsylvania's president at the time, Amy Gutman, sent out an email to all of the faculty saying, we're going to have an internal competition. We want to win this prize. And every university has been advised to only put one proposal forward from that university. We're going to have an internal competition to see who will be the University of Pennsylvania's submission. And at the time, I was getting really excited about the potential to do, I'll say, path-breaking research that would really change the world on behavior change. I had gotten convinced that if we could make meaningful progress on understanding what are the things that can change behavior in a lasting way, that we really could revolutionize outcomes in health and financial decision-making and education. And I was spending a lot of my time with Angela Duckworth, author of the best-selling book Grit, fellow professor at Penn, talking about the science we could do to accelerate ideas in this area. And she and I just happened to be together when that email went out inviting people to apply. And we looked at each other and we were like, we should try to put together a team and a proposal to spend $100 million accelerating the science of lasting behavior change. That would be an amazing use of that funding opportunity. So we did it. We did not get $100 million. I'm like previewing the end. We won the internal competition at Penn with a proposal with about 30 scientists around the world to try, new approaches to doing massive field experiments on behavior change to accelerate the science. We made it to the round of the quarterfinals, I think, or the semifinals, maybe. I'm not sure how they're called. There were different rounds of elimination, but there were thousands of applicants. We made it to the round of the culling of 200, but not of 8 or 1.
Wow.
Sesame Street won them $100 million to do educational programming for Syrian refugee children. And it is hard to feel anything except delighted that was the outcome. But the work that we sort of plotted as part of that process got us so excited that we set up this center at the University of Pennsylvania focused on behavior change anyway. And that was the beginning, really, of my journey to writing this book. It took a few years and a number of more additional research studies that were fueled by that collaboration. But before I realized, it's not just that I want to be studying this for the rest of my life, but when I reflect on everything I have learned from Angela, from all the other members of our team, from all of the behavioral scientists out there, there's actually enough accumulated wisdom and things that I've learned over the course of my now almost 20 years as an academic that I have something useful to say. So that's where it all started. And then the book is my attempt to basically put out there all the most useful insights that I see about how we can create transformative behavior change in ourselves and others, as leaders, as coaches, as teachers, as parents, partners, and what do we know about behavior change that can propel people in positive directions?
Wow, that sounds amazing. It sounded like it was totally worthwhile, regardless of the outcome. It sounds like that was an amazing catalyst for all that that came to you afterwards. So
it was a great experience for me, and I certainly am grateful to the foundations and organizations more generally that do these kinds of moonshot competitions, because I think it has even more positive. There are positive ripple effects by getting people to think that big, right? We didn't win the money, but they still transformed what we were doing with our time and our research energy. And it was exciting to have. It was a good moment for me, like right after tenure, right? You're sort of like, what's the next big thing? I've been working towards this one thing for so long. What's the next big thing that's going to keep me motivated for the rest of my life? And it was a great opportunity. So I'm grateful.
That sounds amazing. I'm still looking for the next big thing for myself. But then I've only been tenured for 3 months now. So
this is about the time. You just need a moonshot thing to come along for you, and it'll transform everything.
That's right. So you're a competitive tennis player, specifically one of the 150 highest ranked 18 and under women's tennis players in the US, which is quite impressive. Can you kind of go back to your childhood and sort of tell our audience more about what it was like to transition from being an athlete to being who you are, a superstar researcher, economist?
Yes, I had a very weird childhood, as anyone who's played a sport really competitively, sort of taken it to the level where it's absorbing hours every day and taking over summers and, consuming family travel knows it it's quite a thing, and it certainly changed the way that I looked at the world. I probably won't raise my children as competitive athletes. I should say it was a little tense, but there were lots of life lessons that came with it, and certainly life lessons about change and dealing, persistence. And tennis is an individual sport. It goes sort of without saying, but that does give it some unique features psychologically. I think as a behavioral scientist, going through these matches, you're not allowed to be coached in the middle of matches. You're completely on your own, sometimes in a 3 or 4 battle against one other person, who sometimes makes unethical decisions at key moments. And right, because players can call their own lines, they can cheat, and they there's anxiety and there's rivalry, people you repeatedly face or you have outside relationships with. So I just learned a lot about myself and about others from going through those experiences, and caring so much about outcomes and at that young age. It's interesting all of the ways that it's ended up coming back in my research and affecting what I think about. One way it came back, by the way, I actually have a paper about men's professional tennis, that's published in the Academy of Management Journal of all places, where we look at how this very competitive context affects people's likelihood to quit. And specifically, we show that when when 2 players are facing one another, and there's just a tiny discontinuity in their rankings, like one of them is ranked a little ahead of the other versus a little behind, there's this giant change in how likely people are to say they sprained their ankle if they lose the first set in a match. So it turns out if you are ranked higher than your opponent, meaning like you're expected to win this match by just 1, right? Like you're 100 in the world and they're 101, but just 1. There's this giant discontinuity in the likelihood that you quit after losing the first set than if you're ranked 1 behind them. So you're ranked 101 in the world and they're 100th. So feeling like you're the favorite and you're supposed to win, and then having a bad outcome, people really want an excuse. And so often they'll, at a higher rate, much higher rate, they'll quit. So it's one sort of fun thing with like the psychology of that. Having experienced competitive pressures, I was like, I think there's some persistence issues we could detect here. But my book is actually, it opens with the tennis example.
Yeah.
And the story I tell there is also one that really is drawn from my own experience, but it's the story of Andre Agassi, who, by the way, I'm like looking at my bookshelf. Hold on. I know you're supposed to hold up your own book when you're talking about your book, but I just want to hold up this book. It's like
I'll hold your book.
If anyone has not read Open by Andre Agassi and has any interest in sports whatsoever, or human psychology, either one, it's like, it's been called one of the greatest sports memoirs of all time. It is so fantastic. And what he talks about, and I retell, he talks about many things, but one of the stories I retell at the opening of my own book that actually I think is so important for change is this moment that turned out to be pivotal in his career. And I had a similar revelation, though obviously did not reach #1 in the world. And that was a moment when he met his probably most important coach, a fellow player named Brad Gilbert. And Brad Gilbert basically said to him, "You're playing tennis all wrong, Andre." Andre Agassi at the time had not really become a superstar, even though he'd had all this potential. Everyone expected so much of him. He was famous for long hair, dangly earrings, flashy clothes, wore lipstick on the court once. So he was like the bad boy of tennis, but he wasn't a superstar, and he'd been expected to be. And Brad Gilbert comes along and diagnoses the problem. And he says, "Look, Andre, what you've been doing all along, you're playing a totally self-focused game. You're not spending any time figuring out who you're up against and strategizing about how to beat your opponent. You're trying to win every point outright with these like big, fancy, flashy shots, instead of thinking strategically, like, what are my opponent's weaknesses? How can I change my game to take advantage of those? How can I tailor my approach in order to be a strategic player?" And that strategic thinking, as it turns out, is absent from a lot of efforts at behavior change, believe it or not, just as it was absent from Agassi's game. And of course, the fun after story of Agassi is like that revelation seemed to change his whole life. Like he skyrocketed to #1 in the world. There were some bumps, but he really turned his career around with that coaching from Brad Gilbert and a new approach to the game. And anyway, I use that analogy and it really helped to have that insight, I think, about tennis, oddly, to think about behavior change, which most people and most organizations do not approach strategically. Most of the time when there is a challenge, like someone wants to quit smoking, or they want to be more productive, or they want to become a marathon runner or a better mentor, whatever their goal, most of the time individuals or organizations who are trying to motivate individuals spend very little time thinking about the obstacles and strategizing about how to specifically tailor solutions to whatever is obstructing that goal. And instead, there's sort of like a playbook, like, oh, we've got to set big, audacious goals. That is the thing that's going to get us over the finish line. Or, I'm trying to think of like some of the favorites, like let's build Atomic Habits. Like there's so many great books, by the way, about habits. I love so many of them, but they're focusing on a single solution, and there's not attention given to what specifically is the challenge here. So what I found in my research, and what is sort of the centerpiece of my book is structured around this, is that we actually can make so much more progress on behavior change when we do a diagnosis and then match the approach using scientific best practices to whatever we're up against. So like just thinking about this in like medical contexts, you could think you want to encourage somebody to take their medication. They're not adhering to like life-saving medication. And you might just say like, well, I'm going to send them reminders. And reminders are going to be really effective to try to get somebody to take that medication if the reason that they haven't been taking it is forgetfulness. But if it's like a side effect and they're finding the medication incredibly unpleasant to take because of that side effect, you can remind them all day long, but you have not solved the problem. It's not about forgetting, right? It's about the side effect. You need a way to combat that side effect. But most of the time we don't do that diagnosis and we get worse outcomes. So that's kind of what the book is all about. Some of the key internal obstacles to change that I have seen, and then match solutions that are tailored, whether it's forgetting that's standing in your way, or a lack of confidence, whether it's habits and defaults, like sort of what the easiest solution, the path of least resistance may be set up to foil you. Maybe it's temptation and procrastination. So there are all these different barriers, but then we can use different tactics to get further. So anyway, that's the link to Andre Agassi and tennis. It was a very long answer, but thank you for letting me. I'm going to put this back. I'm like, oh, I'll show you other books too, if you want to talk about any other books.
That's a wonderful intro to your book. I absolutely loved it. It sounds like your tennis days came full circle, and then it's inspiring how you do research or how you come up with research questions and tackle them. So that sounds wonderful. So the next topic I would love to chat more about is the fresh start effect. My own New Year's resolutions were 3 things. They were all semi-related to having a more balanced and sustainable lifestyle. So the first one was I'll say no more often. Second was I will read more books that aren't necessarily related to research, but something that I've always wanted to read. And then the the third one was that I will prioritize my health and exercise more, just like many people that you're studying. And I ended up having a draft of no emails. I bought more books I wanted to read, and I signed up for Pilates classes. But in terms of actually following through with all these goals and commitments I had in mind, I feel like I have failed pretty miserably over the past year. So could you explain what the fresh start effect is and why we should be excited about it, given that so many people, including myself, end up failing to follow through?
Yes. Okay. So first of all, I'm going to back up for a second and say, Yes, it is absolutely normal to fail to follow through on, I think like 80% of New Year's resolutions fail by one estimate. I've seen, anyway, the number bounces around depending on the study you want to cite, but it's the majority. So that's normal for what it's worth.
Thank you.
And it's completely reasonable to say, like, why should we be excited about something that does not take us all the way to the finish line? And it gives me a chance to say one thing, which is that, so I've done a bunch of research on the fresh start effect, moments like New Year's. I'll describe it in a second. But when I first told some people that I was writing a book about behavior change, because that's something I've studied with my amazing former student Heng Chen Dai, and then sort of known for, there was an assumption that a lot of people jumped to, which is like, oh, you're gonna write a book about fresh starts. And I was like, well, here's the thing. If I wrote a book about fresh starts, I feel like I'd really leave a lot of people hanging, because fresh starts can motivate you to begin, but they don't actually help you cross the finish line. And I would like to write a book that's useful to people in just, not just beginning, but actually crossing the finish line. So it's just going to be the first chapter. So anyway, that is why I did not write a book about fresh starts, is because I think we need so much more than just the motivation to begin to achieve our goals. And that is one of the big issues with fresh starts. And I think part of why we so often fail. I was just talking about the need for strategy, right? When we have a goal, it's not enough to just set it. We actually need a path all the way to the finish line, and we need to be strategic about it. So there's a lot more science that can help us achieve more than 80% success with our goals if we use it, and if we use it strategically. So, okay, but I do think fresh starts are great because they can get you over the hump to beginning. And of course, that is one barrier to change, is that you don't even start in the first place. Like, I should quit smoking, or I should start saying no, or I should, start running regularly. But when is the moment you're going to say, all right, I'm going to stop saying I should, and I'm going to actually try to do something about it? And fresh starts give us that motivation. So my collaborators and I have been studying this since, like 2012. And the impetus for it came from a visit I made to Google, where I gave a presentation about a bunch of different nudges that had been proven effective to get people to save more, exercise more regularly, et cetera. And one of the leaders of Google's HR team turned to me and said, okay, cool, we should use this stuff. We're ready to nudge our employees to better health and better financial security and more productivity. But is there some ideal moment when we could deploy these tools and when we could roll them out, when our employees will be particularly interested and likely to engage? And I just thought it was such a good question that it started this line of inquiry. And what Heng Chen and Jason Reese and I have shown is that there are these moments throughout our lives, New Year's being the best known, but just one of many, when we're more motivated to pursue our goals. And they tend to arise at moments that we think of as new beginnings in our lives. So we think about our lives sort of like we're characters in a book. And as time passes, we think of chapters in our lives as passing. There's this really cool research stream on autobiographical memory showing the way that we tell our own stories. So when we open a new chapter and turn a new page, we feel like we have a new beginning. And that might happen, when you start at a new school, right? You're like starting graduate school, you're starting college, that's a new chapter in your life, right? Or you move to a new city or a new job. But it can also be small moments on the calendar that give us a sense of a new cycle beginning, like the start of a new week or a new month, the celebration of a holiday you associate with fresh starts, like maybe Labor Day or New Year's. It can be the celebration of a birthday, which is a fresh start in your life. So what we see is at those moments, people feel like they have a new beginning because of turning the page in that chapter. And they can say like, okay, I feel more different from my past self than I used to, because I have this clean slate and fresh start. And the old me, like, last year's me, okay, it's January 1. Yeah, last year's me didn't send any no emails, but that was the old me, and the new me is going to be different and able to do it. So you have this greater optimism about what you're capable of. So we see people search more for the term diet on Google at these fresh start dates. They set more goals on a popular goal setting website. They visit the gym more frequently. And we also have shown in random assignment studies, both in the lab and the field, that if we highlight fresh starts on a calendar for someone and then give people an opportunity to begin a change attempt, right? Like start getting emails reminding them to change or start saving for retirement. If we highlight dates like the start of spring or a birthday that they might not have otherwise even noticed and invite them to change at that moment, they're much more motivated than if we invite them to change at an equidistant future point in time. So there's all these different ways we've studied it. And the key finding is really that it can get you to begin, but that's all it does. It doesn't, it doesn't like ensure success. It just gets you the motivation to take the first steps. And so that's why I think it's so important then that we start using all these other tactics from science to figure out, okay, what should the first steps be? And what are the things we need to do to secure success? And by the way, Julia, I'll just say, when you told me you had 3 goals, that's like my first red alarm going off, because there's great work by like Steven Spiller and the marketing department and colleagues from UCLA showing, for instance, if you have multiple goals and you enumerate multiple plans, it actually makes it less likely you'll succeed than if you don't enumerate the plans. And it's because you become overwhelmed because you have so many things that you realize you need to do. It's actually worse. Planning normally helps you achieve your goals, but with multiple goals, that competition becomes overwhelming. You just say like, there's too many things, I can't do it. So I do think like a top line goal, one at a time, is a really useful way to start.
Yeah, that's a sorry. That's a great advice.
Don't apologize. Do you want to take a second to get water?
No, I'm good. I think I had a dry throat today.
Oh my gosh, don't we all, right? I'm like that.
I
brought this with me.
I need some.
It's that time of year.
Yes, exactly. I was thinking as you're talking about fresh start effect, I remember reading about some work on narrative psychology, clinical psychology, showing that people who had addiction problems, they also had to kind of create a new version of yourself and had to have this clear discontinuity in their life to distinguish the old self and the new self, such that they can kind of break out of that old self and so that they can embrace the new version of self. And so that sort of seemed very consistent with what you're describing in your research. So that's really good advice for a lot of people. And since the January 1st is coming up sooner than I would like, and so I hope that our audience can also take notes on what we should be doing by capitalizing on these new moments in life. The next question I have is this Mary Poppins approach to behavior change. I really like this term, and what I particularly love about your work is that you also have fun titles in your papers. So one of them was Holding the Hunger Games Hostage at the Gym, for instance. Or maybe now it needs to be called Holding the Squid Game Hostage at the Gym, right? This idea of mixing the fun activities with the not so fun but dutiful activities sounds like a very promising idea for a lot of people who struggle to bring themselves to exercise, for instance. So can you tell us what it is and how you came to come up with such a practical idea?
Yeah, no, thanks for giving me a chance to talk about this. And you're right. We should totally I wish we could update the title like it's a variable and every year you insert, like it's totally Holding the Squid Games hostage. It's perfect. Squid Game hostage at the gym. And recently it was Holding Bridgerton hostage at the gym. That would have been a better title. Okay, so I will tell you the origin story for this research, and then I'll come back to sort of like the bigger picture. So the origin story was when I was a graduate student. I know we both went through a similar experience because we were just a few years apart at the same place. I found it really hard at the end of a long day of classes to do 2 things that were critical. The first thing I found it hard to do was motivate myself to go to the gym. I knew, we already talked about how I was an athlete as a kid. And for me, physical activity is so key to my sort of mental health and balance and high functioning. I need to get my exercise. But at the end of a long day of class, I was exhausted. I just wanted to like curl up on the couch with a good book or binge watch Netflix. And I had no interest whatsoever in getting in that exercise, even though I knew I should do it. The other challenge I had was wanting to indulge in that entertainment was leading me to procrastinate on doing my problem sets. And I actually had a lot of problem sets in my first year in grad school. I had to take a bunch of classes in computer science to get my PhD. And it was really hard. And the coursework was really hard for me. And, but I would put it off because I came home, I wanted to do something else. So I came up with this idea when I was realizing like, I'm not doing that well in my classes. I'm not that happy. I'm not getting my exercise, I'm out of shape. Everything's kind of off. And I was like, what if I had a new rule for myself, which is what if I only let myself enjoy that indulgent entertainment while I'm at the gym on the treadmill? Maybe that would be the hook that could motivate me to get there. And then when I come home, I won't have this temptation pulling me away from my work. So I tried it and it was like life changing for me. Truly, at the time, it was just exactly what I needed. So I'd come home. I actually started craving trips to the gym, believe it or not, to find out what would happen in my latest, whether it was a book or a TV show. I did audiobooks, TV shows, that it all, all of it, like whatever indulgence I was looking forward to. I listened to all the Harry Potter novels in graduate school, which was really fun. I listened to all the Alex Cross series. So I looked forward to going to the gym to find out what happened next. I'd get there, time would fly while I was there because I was so engrossed in whatever story. And then I'd come home and I was rejuvenated, energized. I'd had my break, I'd had my exercise, and I was able to get right to work and focus. And like my grades improved dramatically. It was amazing. So it was a few years later when I was studying behavioral science and sort of thinking about PhD research questions that I was like, whoa, what I did is actually kind of a cool behavioral science technique. I started referring to it as temptation bundling. I created a rule that only allowed myself. I only allowed myself to enjoy an indulgence, a temptation, while I was doing something that would normally feel like a chore. And it changed the nature of both activities so that I wasted less time and I enjoyed that chore more. And so I started doing research on it, and I proved that I'm not the only person who can benefit, that these kinds of bundles of a temptation with a chore can be helpful to other people too. We've proven that it can help people exercise more regularly. And it's also really easy to sort of see how you could use this in other walks of life, right? I temptation bundle all the time whenever I can, right? Like only allow yourself to open your favorite bottle of wine when you're making a fresh meal for your family, or listen to your favorite podcast while you're doing household chores, or pick up like the frappuccino you've been craving when you're heading to the library to hit the books. So, treats of all different kinds can be combined with the things that normally feel like chores to make the chore actually alluring.
Yeah,
so that's temptation bundling, and that's where it came from.
yeah, that's a brilliant idea. But I can also imagine some people might say that mixing the two may not be a good way to truly relax. So, for example, maybe this is too much information, but I have a habit of taking a weekly bath, which is quite enjoyable. And while I'm at it, I write or I run statistical analysis, which is not always most enjoyable thing for me to do, but it needs to be done. But I have begun to think, what the hell am I doing here while I should be enjoying the bath? So do you ever simply just rest and not bundle with any other activities? Or is that hard for you to do now that you have figured out all this optimal way of bundling activities together?
I think resting and rewarding yourself is super important. So not everything needs to be a bundle. It's more of a tool when there is a temptation that is becoming a distraction, and there's a chore that you just cannot bring yourself to do. And this, I haven't really talked about the specific barrier to change I think this is overcoming, but one of the big barriers to change is present bias, or the tendency to focus more on the instant gratification we'll get from things than the long-term rewards. So it's part of why people smoke, we don't save enough for retirement, we don't exercise enough, we, procrastinate until there's a deadline. So present bias leads to all of these problematic behaviors, and a way to outsmart it is through temptation bundling. When you're facing a present bias challenge where you're like, this thing is good for me, but the rewards are so delayed that I'm not going to get around to it, then sometimes linking a temptation strategically can actually help you make it, oh, well, now that I get this instant hit of gratification if I do the thing, because they're combined, now that present bias is no longer a barrier, but it's actually working for you. So I think this can be a strategic tool to help you get stuff done, but it shouldn't be like the only way you ever experience indulgence. We absolutely need, we need breaks, we need rejuvenation, we need baths that are unmuddied by, like an achievement goal too. This is just a way when there's a goal you're struggling with due to present bias that you can outsmart that particular barrier and may be able to get further. But I think the two are independent. Like it's great, and specifically, like you might bundle one kind of temptation, right? But leave a lot of others unbundled. So I'd be specific. And part of the reason I called Holding the Hunger Games Hostage at the Gym was the title for the paper that Julia Minson and of Harvard and Kevin Volpe of Penn and I wrote, is that it does have that specificity, right? And you can, if you can put boundaries, like these are the things I do only at the gym, or these are the things I only do while I'm simultaneously at the library. But there could be lots of fun things that are not in that set. So you still get those at other times.
Got it. I am feeling a lot better about not working while I'm taking a bath. And I am also convinced about how effective the temptation bundling can be. So the next set of questions I have for you is how much I loved about the episode that you wrote in your book about Max Bazerman's Advising Success. I also have a fond memory of working with him, and I thought the story you had about him as an advisor has an important implications for leaders in today's organization. So can you share with us what he did differently, and what does he stand out? Why does he stand out so much as an advisor?
Yeah, I love that you asked me to tell the Max story. So Max Bazerman is a brilliant professor at Harvard Business School and the Harvard Kennedy School, who Julia and I both benefited from, working with as a mentor. And he's an amazing human for so many reasons, and one of the most successful mentors in our field. And I tell the story in the book of trying to figure out like what was his key to success when I was a junior faculty member first starting to work with doctoral students, because he is wildly successful as a mentor, like more successful maybe by several standard deviations than just, I can't think of anyone else who's in his league. He has this chart on his wall. I don't even think it includes us, Julia, because it was given to him for his 50th
Yes,
birthday.
it's a while ago. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, I mean, it would be doubly as many people on it now, but it's just a family tree of all of the people he's mentored. And it's unbelievable. It's a who's who of business academia. And it's also largely female, which was quite unusual in the 1980s when he started mentoring, that he just helped all of these women become total superstars, including, former dean of Kellogg's School of Management, so many amazing people. And again, from diverse backgrounds, that he made magic happen for those people, it seemed to me. So I said to Max, like, what are you doing? Can you explain to me what your formula is? Because I need to be a good mentor, and I am not clear on how to do that. I do not get, and like, I was talking to these students who were so stressed out, and they needed so much support, and I couldn't figure out like how did he always take everybody and turn them into such great academics? And one of the funny things was that Max basically wrote back this email, and he was like, I don't have a formula, just really amazing students basically show up at my door and I don't blow it. It was like something very self-deprecating along those lines. I think I literally went back and reread the email. He was like, I do a couple things, I'm responsive, I make time for them. But he mostly said, like, I think it's just, they're great when they come to me. So that was a very unsatisfying response, but it took me a few years to actually figure out, I think he was right, just not in the way that he thought he was. He does do all the right things too, but lots of other people do all the right things, right? Like the responsiveness and the what he does. There's two things I think he does that are really special and unique, and that I think research bears out as critically important to facilitating the success of others. That's sort of the punchline, even though I think he wasn't super consciously aware of them. One thing that he does is just, he absolutely believes that his students are exceptional. And no matter what roadblocks they encounter, whether we give him a draft of a paper that's not in great shape or it gets rejected, or we give a mediocre presentation, he's just like a rock. Like, it's going to be fine. This is going to get in. It's an interesting idea. It's good work. You're going to do great. He sees that, he has the positive spin and this fundamental belief in people's capacity to grow and change, that failure is just, it's just a little dip in the road, and then you'll get around it. And I think it's really related. Oh, I am going to pull another book off my shelf. Okay, here we go. It's related to Carol Dweck's awesome work on mindset. She's a brilliant Stanford psychologist who's shown how important it is to have a growth mindset as opposed to a fixed mindset. So when you encounter a failure, if you have a growth mindset, you're like, oh, this is just, this isn't diagnostic of me. It's just something that's gone wrong and I can learn and grow from it. But if you encounter a failure and you have a fixed mindset, you're like, oh, it's diagnostic. This is who I am. I cannot proceed. And Max absolutely always had a growth mindset about his students. And I think it was contagious because he was so convinced you could always overcome. You're so capable. He believed in us, and he always conveyed that, as opposed to like, yeah, this paper, you not working out, you should maybe think about another career. You should think about another research topic. There was always that growth mindset. Another thing he did that I think radiated from this way of looking at his students, and that I think was so important, is he put us in the position, like he believed in us so much and he believed in our capacity so much that he often put us in the role of mentor instead of like, he's always giving advice. He rarely just gave unsolicited advice. Instead, he was often matching us with younger students and asking us to coach and train them on projects. So he would have like a senior student work with a more junior student on a new research idea. And the senior student was like basically mentoring, coaching, helping raise the younger student, teaching them all the ropes of writing a paper and so on. And I came to appreciate much more how important that was. And there's this research by Lauren Estris Winkler, who's at the Kellogg School of Management now, and I've gotten to collaborate with a bit on this, showing that when we put someone in the position of mentor or coach or advisor, it actually helps that person who's in the position of coach or role model improve their own outcomes in that dimension. And the reasons are several. One is it boosts that person's confidence. When we say like, can you give advice to this younger student? Can you coach them and mentor them? It signals like, I really believe you've got what it takes to be a leader, to be a coach, to be a mentor, even though, yeah, you haven't maybe figured it all out yet, because you're a student too. I believe in you. I think you've got the skills and the smarts. And so that really boosts people's confidence immensely and motivation, and leads them to work harder. Is now like, oh, you think I'm good enough. The second thing it does is it like causes you to introspect about what will work more deeply than you maybe would if you were only responsible for your own success. Because now you're like, oh no, I'm going to let this junior person down if I don't figure it out. So you introspect, and maybe you come up with some good insights. And once you do, you're going to feel hypocritical if you don't take them yourself. So I think Max had this magical combination related to his faith in his students that he layered on top of all the other best practices of, being available, being, having good taste in ideas, being well networked, etc. What was like, he believed in us, he conveyed that growth mindset and that belief, and he put us in these coaching roles and was constantly letting us advise others rather than just sort of like dictating, oh, here's what you should do, and not letting us believe that we had the insights and the tools to figure it out ourselves. So
that sounds just like Max, I know. So brings me back all the lovely memories. But what I loved about it in your book is that you're making that implicit behaviors that he was already engaging in very, very explicit, like what it is actually doing to our students. So the next one more question I have so many questions for you. You also talked about forming an advice club in the book. I was so intrigued by this idea. You had this like no club with Modupe Akinola at Columbia and Dolly Chog at NYU. And that's the kind of club I would love to form myself. You probably know this from my New Year's resolution. So can you tell the audience about what it was and how it helped you navigate your career?
Yes, and you absolutely need to start one of these clubs. It has been life-changing. So it was motivated by research presentation by Linda Babcock. She came to Wharton, I want to say in 2015, to present some of her research on how much more often women engage in non-promotable tasks in organizations than men. So a non-promotable task is something that as the name suggests, you probably aren't going to get a promotion for doing, right? You're not going to get a raise, but somebody's got to do it. So think like organizing the office holiday party, or taking notes in a meeting, or, sitting on a committee that somebody needs to sit on it, but your service on that committee is just not going to be rewarded in any tangible way. So it turns out women do more of this than men. We're less likely to say no when we're asked to do these kinds of tasks. We're less comfortable saying no. And so she presented all this data, and she said, hey, and I have a no club now. It's a support group of women, and we reach out to each other and help each other say no. And we build each other's confidence in the ability to do that and support each other when we're not sure what to say yes to. Because it turns out women are better at like negotiating and thinking for others than for themselves. So that she was trying to harness that. And I was like, I'm going to copy and paste that awesome idea. And I called Madupe and Dolly, and we immediately formed our no club, and it sort of turned into an advice club. But, we email each other when we get these asks and we're not sure how to handle them, because some of them you should say yes to. We help each other figure out when to say yes and when to say no, and how to say those things in a way that's approachable and delightful. And it had all the benefits I anticipated, which was like, social cohesion was wonderful. They're both women at similar career stages who I adore and admire. And I learned so much from their advice, and just from their friendship is wonderful as well. And so those things all happened. But an unexpected benefit of this club was related to this research and advice giving, which is I surprisingly found that I was learning from what happened when I was asked for advice. So not only did I get this awesome wisdom from my peers, but when, say, Dolly would reach out because she'd gotten an invitation to some conference in Switzerland, and should I do this? I'm not sure. And I would find like, oh, I haven't encountered a situation like this before, but now that Dolly asks, I'm like, I can see really clearly what she should do and how she should handle this.
Mhm.
I'm like, this one should be a no. This one should be a yes. And I'm giving advice like, here's why, here's why this. And then when I faced a similar challenge, I realized, oh, I know how to handle this because I solved this problem for Dolly. It's just the same problem. And so in facing challenges and giving advice to others, I was building confidence in my own ability to handle similar challenges, and like seeing more clearly when I saw it through the lens of looking at it for someone else more objectively, at more of a distance than when I did for myself. So I recommend everyone form advice clubs because of all of their benefits. You build friendships, which make us happier. You learn from other people's wisdom. You can sort of copy and paste some of the smart things they're doing in life and start doing them too. And then finally, you actually benefit from the time you devote to advising others as well. So it's just this like amazing multiplier effect.
That sounds amazing. It's so incredible that how you seem to have enhanced sense of clarity when you're the one who's giving advice, but then when it comes to making your own decision, something gets in the way, and it's very, very difficult to sort of stand up for yourself and say,
right?
no, yes.
You have that distance, and that really helps. But then you can reuse the insights you gain in that.
Yeah, that's right. And it's almost like sort of, it resonates with me in that Ethan Cross in my area has also done research on sort of third-party perspective, and sort of writing from that perspective also creates that distance. And so actually having a social group that allows me to see myself from the other person's perspective, I can sort of see why that is super useful. So thanks for that tip. Is there something you can tell people who are in this what the hell effect phase? So this effect describes a situation where even a very small failure, such as missing a daily diet goal by a few calories, can lead to a downward spiral in behavior. So you end up just eating the whole apple pie, which was in your book. So I was wondering how to quickly get out of this mindset and give yourself a fresh start.
By the way, I have to say, I have never eaten a whole apple pie, though I aspire to someday. But I do. I think the what the hell effect is like the best named effect in psychology. It's so amazing. Okay, so first I'm going to do really like rapid fire 2 things we've actually already talked about that can be deployed here, and then I'll give you a new insight. So first, for the what the hell effect, this like giving up after a small goal failure, growth mindset definitely is a thing that can help, right? trying to reframe when you encounter a failure, not like diagnostic of me, I give up, but instead, oh, like what went wrong and how can I learn and grow and do better when I next encounter a challenge, like a temptation or, lots of reasons we have the what the hell effect don't involve apple pie. It could be, you miss a deadline at work or whatever it might be. What can you learn? What went wrong and grow from? So the mindset can help. Fresh starts are another thing that can help. You can try to create sort of a psychological distance between that failure and say like, how can I turn the chapter on that and put it in the past? Whether it's like, okay, on Monday, it's Monday, we're going to say that was last week and this is a new week, but what can you do to create a fresh start distance? Those things are two tactics that can be useful. But the third I want to highlight is from Marissa Sharif, who's my colleague at Wharton, and Suzanne Shu from Cornell, have this really brilliant work on an idea that Marissa used in her own life related to, they call it emergency reserves. And the idea is, we know that it's important to have tough goals. When you set a tough goal for yourself, you're more motivated than if you set like a wimpy goal, because you're striving, you want to get there. But tough goals come with this downside of, the what the hell effect, but a goal failure can set you off course. So like there's this tension. And Marissa came up with this idea of giving herself tough goals with a couple of get out of jail free cards. So she had a little wiggle room, and like she did it with running. We've been talking about a lot about physical activity, though she studied it in the context of productivity. But she'd say, I'm going to try to run 7 days a week, but I'm going to give myself 2 emergency reserves. Like if something goes terribly wrong, we won't count it against me. If I, can't make it up to 2 days a week, I can use those chits. More than that, and I can't use a get out of jail free card. But that's how she thought about it. And that turns out to be really distinct from saying, I'm just going to try to do it 5 days a week. They sound the same, but in her research, she's shown if you set the tough goal and give yourself a couple get out of jail free cards, you keep pushing and you try not to use those chits. Whereas if you set the wimpier goal of 5 days a week, which is identical, psychologically, it feels really different. Because once you hit 5, you're like, I'm done. I'm not going to do anymore. Whereas if you're striving for 7 with the emergency reserves, once you hit 5, you keep pushing. So she's shown that this idea of a tough goal with emergency wiggle room can combat the what the hell effect, prevent it. And I think it's something we can all use in our lives. Like, how can you give yourself just a tiny bit of wiggle room in the form of like, you have an emergency chit or a mulligan. You'll only use it when you really have to. Your goal is still that tough goal. But now if you do have something that goes wrong, you can call it, well, that was a mulligan, that was an emergency, and feel like you're still on track.
Yeah, that sounds like a great answer to many of the questions that I see in the Q&A section. We have about 5 more minutes, and so I will go right into dive into these questions that people have here. Has your research changed or informed your parenting behaviors?
Oh my goodness, in so many ways, not always productively, I should say. One that you'll get a kick out of is that my son, like many children, is not very interested in eating green vegetables, but we've been able to temptation bundle. So when he is watching a favorite TV show, that's when we bring out the green vegetables. And the rule is like, okay, as long as you're eating, the show gets to keep going. We can watch a little bit more. We'll watch the whole episode. But if you start declining the bites, he's a little kid. So I have a fantasy that this will turn into a habit, and he's going to be the like college student who goes to the Super Bowl party with a big bowl of Brussels sprouts. We'll see if that pans out. So that's one silly example. Another, I would say, and this is not so much my research as research I've learned from, is that I'm a huge fan of the amazing work of Robert Cialdini. And okay, let's see, now I have to go to a different bookshelf to pull out this book, but I'm going to do it. Like, you can see my blue jeans. Here we go. This amazing book, Influences by Bob Cialdini, highly recommended. And his research, I'd say like biggest contribution, there's so many, it's a little hard to pick, but is showing that when we describe what other people are doing, when we're like, 80% of your neighbors are using less energy than you are, it causes people to reduce their energy consumption. Or if we tell you 70% of college students drink less than you do on a Saturday night, it makes you reduce your alcohol consumption. Whatever behaviors we observe in others or described to us as the norm, we're attracted to following those too. This matters descriptively in an experience. There's also great research, like if you end up randomly assigned to a a group of roommates who are more studious, you end up doing better in school. So our peer effects are really big. And that's certainly, that knowledge influences the way I parent for sure. And that I think a lot about who are the peers that I'm exposing my son to, what messages can I convey about what's what most people are doing, what's cool, to support the values that I think are important around education, respect for other people, valuing diversity and a diversity of opinions and so on. So I think that understanding of how much social cues change life is really important for a parent to keep in mind.
Yeah, thank you. The other questions that came up in the Q&A section is around our health behavior. So based on your expertise, is there any new ideas on framing messages to overcome extreme hesitancy in getting vaccinations?
Oh gosh, that is such a good question. And I'd say actually the thing that I have spent the most time on in the last year, since actually the last year and a half, really since spring of 2020 in my own research, has been related to encouraging vaccination. It's something I had studied previously, and my team really doubled down during the pandemic and said, like, maybe we can make a big difference here if we accelerate research in this area. So we actually did a bunch of studies even before vaccines were released, trying different messages to encourage people to get a flu vaccine. In fall of 2020, we ran a 700,000 person randomized controlled trial with Walmart pharmacies and a 50,000 person trial with 2 health systems in the Philadelphia area, and tested different messages that turned out to be portable to encouraging COVID-19 vaccination. And we tested dozens of messages. What worked best in our trials was a really simple encouragement telling people a vaccine is reserved for you or waiting for you, which I'm sort of contorting the question. I do not think that that message combats extreme hesitancy. In fact, I'm confident it doesn't. I think what it does instead is it presumes that this is an attractive option to some degree, and then conveys, or it conveys that it's attractive, that it's recommended. It conveys a bit of exclusivity, like this is your personal version. So loss aversion kicks in. I don't want you to have my dose. But my student Hang Chen Dai, who did the work on Fresh Starts along with Sylvia Sicardo of Carnegie Mellon, they turned around and used that very same framing to nudge people to get more COVID-19 vaccines after we'd shown it was useful for the flu in the fall of 2020. And I do think thinking more about, how do we make it incredibly easy and efficient? And, if we can give people default appointments, tell them we've reserved not only a vaccine, but a time for them at a convenient location. I think actually it would go further than most expect, because there are still folks out there who aren't just extremely hesitant, but for whom it's extremely inconvenient or they can't be bothered. And that is one path to increasing vaccination rates, is just making it radically easy and attractive in ways that we haven't yet experimented with or explored. We can use that also for boosters and with kids 5 through 11, which will get us a lot closer to herd immunity.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for working on that specific topic. I'm sure a lot of people are appreciative of the fact that the experts are already working on it, right? So thank you. So little time and so many questions, and unfortunately, we will have to wrap up now. So this is her book. Her book is filled with great insights that she found through decades of rigorous research. So if you want to change for the better, I highly recommend that you read this and do copy and paste her brilliant insights into your life. So thank you so much, Katie, and the audience who joined us today. We will email all of you in the next few days with the link to the video from this event. And this is our final Positive Links session for the semester. We will resume our series on January 25th with Ethical Learning and Character Development, featuring Miriam Kuchaki from Northwestern. So watch for event details in early January, and thank you so much, Katie.
Thank you so much, Julia. This was such a treat. It was so lovely to see you, and thanks to everyone who joined.
Same for me. Bye, everyone.